has this movie, or when did this movie, or for how long did this movie find its way to reach or touch you?
This is an interesting question. This movie came up out of the streets of New York that I was dependent upon to survive. And I began to piece these images together and saw a story there. I was a part of that quilt. So I began to put these characters together very briefly, and they began to form their own story. Because New York itself is a story. So you put these characters in sort of a stage play. Then I met, I was working as a second assistant director on a movie called Subject Was Roses with Martin Sheen, Patricia Neal, Jack Aberson. I'd written 12 pages of the script. And I took it to Martin. I met Michael Dunn, Michael Dunn's girlfriend, and told her that I was working on this script. And we were talking about Michael, and I'd seen Michael in a few things. And his girlfriend took me to meet Michael very briefly over here at 8th Avenue on 44th Street. There's a bar there.
A very different 8th Avenue.
A very different 8th Avenue today. 37 years later. It took 37 years, 37 years later, right? So Michael was sitting on the bar with a bottle of Maker's Mark next to him. That's his favorite drink. And he was singing Irish melodies. So anyway, one thing led to another, and I told Michael that I would like to change part of the script and write him in as the star of this movie. Well, of course, he was delighted. And then shortly after that, he agreed to do the story. Took the 12 pages to Michael, to Martin, and gave it to him, and said, "Look, would you read this?" And he came back the next day and said, "Frank, I like it. I think we ought to do it. But can you finish the script?" Then I went back into the streets of New York and really began to open up, looking at these characters. You know, Patch is her name. I had a decision to make whether it should be an Hispanic woman or an African American woman playing the role of this girl who's come into New York City, looking to make a life for herself, and in 2 or 3 days or whatever she runs out of money, and the only way to really begin to protect herself, she figured, or to get that money, she had very little skills, couldn't find a job, and she's Caucasian. New York was not the New York then as it is today. And so anyway, I cast her into this role. Johnny Brown, the character, him, he actually is myself. You know, I lived a double life. He panhandles on the street for nickels and dimes or whatever he can get his hand on because he's locked out of Wall Street. He can't get into into that system, or he doesn't have enough money to, as he says in the movie, to invest in some of his ideas. And so, I lived on the East Side and basically, you know, painted apartments during the day, but I would go to Grand Central Station at night, change my clothes, and then go home to my East Side apartment because my neighbors didn't know I was painting apartments. They thought I was this very successful African-American guy. Michael Dunn's Apple Wagon, this whole thing, he himself dropped out of the university, a university that I could not get into at the time. Money was the issue. Many of us had those issues. So he had quit the university and decided to come out, and he couldn't take society anymore. He didn't like where the system was going, so he said to hell with it. Built himself an Apple Wagon, walked into the streets of New York, and all these characters that I'd met in the streets of New York and in the city of New York began to emerge and meet him at his wagon. I didn't even know my culture. So when I saw these people, and all of a sudden there's a community out there, there's a thing out there to belong to, and then the World Trade Center was being built, halfway finished, but yet I saw all these people, and I saw all of this money. 42nd Street. We see 42nd Street in 1970, 1971. It looks like a slice out of a Steven Spielberg movie when you go back and look at it now. But you compare 42nd Street, Times Square then, and Times Square today, oh, it's really striking just to see that.
I'd like to ask you just to talk about the characters and their relationship with New York and how together that just created something between everything and the city that resonated in the film.
Need each other to survive, and that's what this story is about. It's about the American dream. It's about survival. But how do you survive when you come in here with $2.50, which is basically what I had in my pocket when I arrived?
You had to rely on the resources of New York City.
I had to rely on the resources of New York City.
The mayor.
And I hope the mayor is not listening, but there are a couple of shots that I did steal. we couldn't afford it. It was an independent movie.
Well, guerrilla filmmaking.
Yeah, you know, survive. I mean, we went into the trenches, went into the subway, we grabbed a few shots. I hope the mayor and the city of New York will forgive us.
Certainly technology played a large part of it. was taking a film that just in filmmaking terms had been really just a work print at that time. A work print that was edited on with and in a state of a work print that is now 30 years old, with a lot of missing shots, and the negative, as I understand in the film, some of it couldn't be found. And you had enough material in there, certainly, and enough of a supporting crew of people, talented people, to somehow make the film you wanted in the end through the technology of film preservation, video preservation, color correction, and reshooting shots for scenes that you can no longer put back into the film.
We did things with Man in the Mirror, with the technology, that without the technology, no, it wouldn't have happened. And I didn't even know it existed until this film was open and we began to unfold that technology.
I think that when you look at life that way, you're placing yourself not necessarily at the center of your own universe, and that's a very generous way to look at life.
My father always said, there's no such thing as can't, I don't know, and impossible. And if you earn $1 and your community needs, and you want to be a part of that community, share it. Because you'll always have something around you, that will help to protect you at the time when you don't have the $1.
Sure. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.